The whole spy genre is, in a way, epitomized by Notorious.
All of Hitchcock's work has influenced specifically genres like the spy film.
Hitchcock is the architect of the espionage genre on film.
When you look at how many spy films, how many films with espionage subplots in them that Hitchcock produced, you begin to realize that Hitchcock defined this genre.
Hitchcock made a lot of spy movies.
39 Steps.
The Secret Agent.
Sabotage.
Lady Vanishes.
Foreign Correspondent.
Saboteur.
Alfred Hitchcock's association with the espionage genre goes right back to the beginnings of espionage becoming a major genre both in literature and in film. Alfred Hitchcock not only created great spy adventure films, he also delved very deeply into the gritty nature of what being a spy, what keeping secrets actually does to a person.
Well, Sergeant, you saw what happened tonight.
Yes, sir.
Anything your end?
I'm not certain, but I could have sworn I saw Verloc come back in the middle of it all. Later, when I challenged him, he said he'd never been out at all. His wife confirmed it.
Naturally. She would if she's in it.
Heroes in Hitchcock films in the 30s and early 40s are not spies. They're regular, average Joes.
Hitchcock would take and make as his protagonist in these films outsiders, people who had done nothing to actually place themselves in danger and in the middle of intrigue. These people are drawn into an espionage plot outside of their will. Sylvia Sidney, certainly in Sabotage, does not want to be drawn into her husband's plot to set off a terrorist explosion in London and kill a huge number of people. She's unaware of this, and when she finds out about it, it has devastating consequences for her.
It wasn't about the secret documents. It wasn't about the uranium. It wasn't about the MacGuffin. It was about average people and professional people who are caught up in a game they think is very important. Subject of the movie is human emotions and how espionage is the forge that makes those emotions white hot and explode. It was a chance to examine human behavior in crisis.
Through being sucked into these plots and through being taken to the absolute limit of what they can endure, these characters find out who they truly are. They find out something important and essential about themselves.
He takes everyday, average items and he peels back the layers and he reveals something sinister or dark behind the innocent exterior. In Sabotage, an innocent-looking pet store is really the villain's hideout, and a birdcage actually holds the bomb. He does this in Notorious with the innocent-looking wine bottle.
Notorious is filled with elements that will become iconic to the spy genre. Beautiful woman, played by Ingrid Bergman in this case, who is drawn into a darkly handsome man, a villain who's part of a secret organization with a secret plan. There's globe-hotting as we go to South America.
Ben Hecht and Hitchcock and others were trying to figure out, what are these people doing down in South America?
In 1944, when Notorious was first being developed, the storyline was going to be much grander. Ben Hecht hated the Nazis. And the plan was for the storyline to include secret armies training in South America.
But Hitchcock really wanted something very simple that he thought that the audiences could understand.
The rumors were flying around 1945-44 that America was working on this top secret kind of weapon.
During the writing of Notorious, the atomic bomb had not yet been exploded, so until that happened, most of the general public had no idea what uranium was all about anyway.
After hearing stories from a writer from the New Yorker about the Manhattan Project, he and Hecht visited a physicist at Caltech.
People were not allowed to talk who were in the scientific area and developing the uranium.
The physicist warned Hitchcock to stay away from this subject matter. Selznick sent the most recent script draft of Notorious to J. Edgar Hoover, who responded to Selznick that he thought it would be in his best interest to remove all traces of the FBI from the final Notorious shooting script.
The FBI or something came and asked Hitchcock all kinds of questions. Where'd you come up with this? He said, well, I just made it up.
Of course, events in world history kind of overtook the film, and by the time the movie is released, everybody on Earth knew what uranium was because we'd had the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by then.
I think you can be very proud of yourself, Mrs. Sebastian. That sand that Devlin brought in shows uranium ore, so now we know what we're driving at.
With uranium, Alfred Hitchcock knew that he had a MacGuffin for Notorious.
MacGuffin was the word that Hitchcock used for the thing everybody in the movie is obsessed with. The money, the secrets, the formula, whatever it happens to be. In the case of Notorious, it turns out to be the uranium.
Well, then the wine cellar's the obvious place to look.
What do I look for if I get the key?
You look for a bottle of wine, like the one that rattled the fellow at dinner that night.
When Hitchcock comes into the world of the spy genre, spies were not seen as noble and good people. Pre-World War II, in most fiction and literature, most secret agents, certainly not all, but the vast majority of secret agents and spies were seen as nefarious characters for the enemy. This changes during World War II, and it impacts Notorious.
Notorious wasn't quite ready to show good guys as spies, but it did show how far they were willing to push the boundary of morality for the cause of good. And it was one of the first movies to really delve into that question in a really deep way.
I think I will have another drink.
I thought you'd get around to it.
Make it a double.
Notorious comes out about the same time as another seminal spy film, The House on 92nd Street.
We see with House on 92nd Street where it's more about kind of dour FBI agents investigating situations and revealing traitors and spies.
In certain ways, you could almost look at it as a prequel to Notorious, as though Alicia's father had been one of the spies in this ring.
You got to listen to me. You don't know what we stand for.
I know what you stand for.
You and your murdering swine. I've hated you ever since I found out. My daughter, don't talk to me like that.
Stay on your side of the table.
House on 92nd Street uses a documentary style, real locations, in some instances people who were actually involved in the case.
Photographs from hidden cameras that were used in the actual case, depicted in the film, are seen in the feature film.
It's a style that would be prominent for another decade or so.
Hitchcock's Notorious is not in that vein, in that it is not just a thriller. Notorious is a romance. It is a love story.
Notorious uses a lavish style. Its emphasis is on seduction, on danger.
I am married to an American agent.
The camera is a character in the film. It's a glamorous world, dangerous. But wouldn't you like to partake for a little while?
Notorious makes everything so personal. It makes everything very sensual. In many ways, it is a kind of contradiction to those cold portraits that we see in other films.
And this, ultimately, is the style that's going to prevail in the spy genre.
The sensuality of spying that is part of what goes on in Notorious will be played out in a kind of extreme version when we see James Bond in the 1960s mixing spying with love affairs all over the globe.
What's going on behind my back?
Nothing. Look. No hands.
It's the first time you see Devlin. We're only seeing the back of his head, and we're being sort of introduced to him through a beautiful woman. This is very similar to the way Sean Connery was introduced as James Bond in Dr. No.
I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Also, once Devlin and Alicia set off on their mission, they're whisked to an exotic location, which the Bond films always have exotic locations. And once there, they do battle with a ruthless organization that brooks no inefficiency and no dissent.
I'm afraid, gentlemen, that something must be done about Emil.
Not unlike Spectre in the Bond films.
I warned you. We do not tolerate failure, number 3. You know the penalty.
Yes.
There are a lot of elements in Notorious that you see a lot in the later James Bond movies.
We're meeting him tomorrow. The rest is up to you. You've got to work on him and land him.
Mata Hari. She makes love for the papers.
Come, come, my dear. You are very fortunate to have been chosen for such a simple, delightful duty. A real labor of love.
Alfred Hitchcock was definitely in the minds of a number of people when it came time to bring James Bond to the silver screen. Ian Fleming wanted Alfred Hitchcock to direct the first James Bond film.
When North by Northwest was released, this is a film that heavily influenced Cubby Broccoli and how he wanted to see the James Bond films get made. But Hitchcock had a very different approach to filmmaking than the Bond filmmakers did. Hitchcock was always looking for the journey of the main characters. He wanted to take these characters to the limit, but he wanted to see what they could find out about themselves. But in the early Bond films, Bond is somewhat of a static character. Bond is a character who goes on a physical journey, but it is more of a mythical battle between gigantic forces of evil.
In the 60s, Hitchcock continues in the genre, but by this time, spy films have perhaps passed Hitchcock by. The Bond films are immensely successful, and even some of the parodies of Bond films are successful. But the Bonds and others have taken the template of the spy movie, but thrown away those moral ambiguities which were so dear to Hitchcock's heart. Audiences were frolicking in the style that Hitchcock had set up so well.
Hitchcock's approach in Notorious is the approach we think of now as the modern espionage film. If you look at House on 92nd Street, if somebody went out to make a spy film like that today, it wouldn't feel at all like what you would expect from an espionage film.
Suspected enemy agents invading the Americas, the FBI started building up its force of special agents and employees.
Throughout the history of spy movies, we have stolen atomic bombs and the Cold War threat presented as a possible doomsday.
Sir, this orders me to load the rocket with nuclear bombs.
Well, Hitchcock was there first with Notorious.
This was coming out just about at the time the war was ending, dealing with subjects that resonated in a lot of spy films thereafter.
When the film came out, many of the reviewers dismissed the idea of having Nazis as villains. World War II was over. But you get a little bit further down the line, into the 1950s, and oh, that ex-Nazi who survived. How easy a villain it became.
Way in which that the Bourne ultimatum and the whole Bourne sequence, in fact, was shot was an attempt to do for a contemporary audience what Hitchcock tried to do for his audience.
He liked to put the audience through it.
Shake people up. When people came into the movie theater, he wanted to make them see in a new and different way. And Hitchcock showed what it was that cinema could be, what it was that cinema could do.
He speaks to us. He spoke to the people then. He speaks to us now.
He knew how to involve the audience.
He understood the darkest side of people's nature.
He found a way to transmit his own personal fears, emotions, joys, and make them very understandable.
It's a spy story that stands on its own, and it is still fresh today. It's not dated.
If you look at Hitchcock's legacy with espionage, you see that this was a filmmaker who influenced everything that came after him.